welcome to Turn the Page, the official podcast of the Syosset Public Library.
Hi, this is Syosset Library's Turn the Page podcast. I am chatting with the author Javon Tobel, and they are the author of Fated to be Monsters, which was so good.
Thank you. I really appreciate that.
Oh my goodness. It's really just funny when you start reading something and it just pulls you in, like, what is it? Like you're being isekai'd into another world by reading a book, which is very nice because I think, we all would like a little escapism, be that escapism fantasy, horror, sci-fi, or romance. And your characters are just so good, and you manage to balance so much in Fated to be Monsters. So my first thing I want to ask you after, welcoming you is how you began this book, like how the characters in the world came to you, because I felt like I was dropped right in next to Anca, and it was not very hard for me to feel like I could see the world around her and everything that was going on.
Yeah. No, well, thanks for having me on. I really appreciate it. I'm always happy to I've been told I'm a chatterbox before. I can have an earnest conversation with a brick wall. And obviously talking about books is like one of my favorite things in the world. But no, so where this story started, I actually wrote an article about this in a blog recently. I am kind of new to writing romance. I'm not new to reading it, but I'm new to writing it. I've always kind of enjoyed it in the background. And this is the book that finally tilted me over the edge. The original, like where this story came from originally, actually, so not to get too deep into my creative process, but most of my books, they usually come from just like a cool idea where it's just like, I don't have the grand picture immediately. I don't know the arc. I don't know what the character's going to be. It's just like, oh, wouldn't that be kind of awesome? And so for this one, are you familiar with the Savo man-eaters? Okay, you are? Okay, excellent. Yeah. So for everyone who's listening, essentially they are in, I believe it was early 19 teens, Kenya. The British were building a railroad through the area, and the workers stopped working because a pair of lions was picking off workers in the middle of the night, just like taking people. And I think it's unclear how many people they killed. It's like somewhere between like 30 and 80, a lot. And eventually they had to call in specialists to kind of hunt them down, and it was this whole deal. And I had the thought when I was just kind of reading about it again, that like what would this look like if everything was that dangerous? Like what would a situation look like where it's like, okay, what if like monsters were a common thing, and what sort of circumstances would cause this to happen? So it started off as like this kind of dark fantasy, competitive, like Jaws but competitive. That was originally my conception of it, is like there's a monster out there and there's these two groups that are trying to kill it first. But then what happened was, so Anca and Eugen have always been in the story. Eugen was the first character that I came up with. He was just named the Executioner at first. And every time I had them on the page, because again, the first draft was so different. It was not a romance. It was just a dark fantasy. The first draft of this story, every time they were on the page together, even when they were earnest antagonist and protagonist, there's this heat. I couldn't get away from them. They were very into each other, and no matter what I did. And so I kind of talked with some friends about it, and they were like, yeah, why not give it romance a shot, see what happens. And then it kind of just unspooled from there.
So one of the things I think for me, because romance is not something I am opposed to, but like everybody has their own sort of escape. And like I found a lot of people recently have either gone like romance or very, very dark. I am usually the person who goes very, very dark, but I don't dislike romance. Like I am a fangirl, I am a shipper. But the thing is, I have to actually care about the characters before I want that romance. And Eugen and Anca, they have, I read a few reviews, and a lot of people are like enemies to lovers or this to that, and the tropes of romance have become a selling point. And I do have to say, I love that because I love that we're embracing that tropes can be comfort food, right? That, like it's okay to like a specific type of pairing, but what I really, really liked about your characters and in your world was that it felt very fresh. And while their sort of growing relationship was really, really important to their development, the greater world and the characters around them, you know, were a huge part of this tapestry too. So not only did I care about these characters, not only did I really liked Eugen. I really, really liked him. And maybe it's because that trope is a me character. Those are the characters I genuinely care about. But I liked Anca too. And you really saw their conflicts with how they were kind of pitted against each other, how the queen sort of worked the strings of the different houses. And it made me care about not only them and how they would relate to each other, but just everybody in the greater world.
Mhm. World building is one of those things that I feel like a lot of people struggle with, but I tend to excel at. There's other things I suck at, don't worry, I'm not saying I'm perfect, but no, so to kind of make a tangent. Okay, so first off, I wanted to go back real quick to the start of the question or the prompt. You said that it feels like everyone is stratifying either into romance or very dark, and I agree.
Absolutely, yeah.
And it's not just books. Just a minor like anecdote. I was at Gen Con this past year, which is this huge board game convention in Indianapolis, Indiana. Oh,
I
you've
love
been?
Gen Con. I know Gen Con. But for those who
Mhm.
don't, for those who don't, yes, yes, it is, and it's wonderful.
Yes. No, so I hadn't been in years, so I went last year and it was great. But I noticed all of the board games, all the fantasy board games particularly, it's either like super cozy mice board game or the darkest fantasy you have ever seen in your life. And there's no middle ground at all. But no, so I also tend towards the darker stuff. I got my start as a horror author way back in high school. I kind of cut my teeth on Dean Koontz, Stephen King, H.P. Lovecraft. And my first short stories were just like aping the epistolary format of that Lovecraft really liked to do, and Bram Stoker also did. And I wanted to do horror, and I wrote a lot of short stories, but it never clicked. It never materialized into anything. I never felt drawn to it. In the background, I was playing Dungeons and Dragons for like 12 years or something like that. For those unfamiliar with Dungeons and Dragons, it's a tabletop role-playing game, traditionally a fantasy world where it's a collaborative storytelling thing where there's a lot of players who are separate characters, and then one person who is called the Dungeon Master who weaves the story together. I was a Dungeon Master the entire time. So basically, I spent those 12 years creating worlds, coming up with ideas, religions, countries, wars, people, and then bouncing it off a beta group that was right there, and I could get live feedback about what was clicking, what wasn't, what did they like. And so I really, even though like I took a break from writing for a long time, I just stopped in between, I think it was like 2017 to 2021. I just didn't write at all. I was still sort of like practicing, the craft of creating and being creative. And so basically when I write these stories, I make the world first. It's very rare that I come up with a story and then build a world to match it. I rather create a world and then try to figure out, okay, where are the interesting conflict points? Where could this reasonably fall? So notably, my first novel, Curse of Flame, this and that both share the same world, and I built it and then kind of found out where it fits from there. And yeah, no, I mean, I love writing characters. I love Anka and Yugen. There's a lot of me in Yugen, if I'm being honest. There's a lot of me in Anka too, but yeah, I just like really love writing those characters. I'm writing the sequel right now, which is due to come out in the fall. And I'm going to be really sad because it's just this duology. And then I think I'm done with Anka and Yugen for a little bit. They might show up in some side stories. I have some spin-offs in mind. But yeah, I really enjoyed writing in their perspectives.
I really liked reading in their perspectives, and I liked the characters around them as well. Like, I think, one thing in um, world building in general is you're not just building the world and you're not just building the magic and the religion, but you're also building the population and how they react to all those things. And you did a really, really good job with that.
Well, yeah, thank you. Thank you.
Did you have any, I guess you could call them side characters or characters in the ensemble that really kind of pulled at you a bit while you were writing this?
Yeah, so I've upset some readers with some. I'm not going to drop, we're not in the spoiler portion of this, I'm guessing yet. So not going to talk about, what happens to certain characters down the road. But no, so Marin, the Doya, her second in command, he quickly materialized. He wasn't the first, he wasn't the second, but he was like probably the fifth character I thought of. And I have like a very specific image in my mind of who this man is. And, he started off as like kind of really cocky and smarmy, and he stayed cocky and smarmy, but the fatherly, avuncular sort of care for her and where his loyalties really fell. Because again, all he cares about is her. He will move heaven and earth and do anything just to protect her. But no, I really enjoyed him. I have to give a shout out to Victor. So this isn't spoilers because it happens, I think, in chapter 4 or 5 or something like that. But when we meet Anca at first, she is engaged to a man named Victor, and he is the worst. He's terrible. It's an arranged marriage where they're not gonna work out at all, and they quickly split, in like the first quarter of the book. So it's not spoilers to say that. However, I have to express my condolences to Victor. Victor, I'm really sorry. You were such a fun character at first. He had some great lines, some incredible lines. He was very funny. He was the perfect counterweight to Marin because Victor is very prim and proper and very elegant, and Marin is just sort of like a down to the earth, red-blooded sort of guy. But unfortunately, Victor works better as a jerk. And even when I tried to make him less of a jerk, people were like, no, he needs to be more of a jerk. And now is what he is today. So it still works out. I still like where Victor ended. I enjoy what a jerk he is, but at the same time, I have to express some condolences for the fun Victor I had to kill.
No, it's fair. And, yeah, no, I'm just thinking about him in the beginning and just how, I mean, he was very like vain and into his looks. And there's even a line about that too, just, about like how he's really into his looks or just into looks in general and just physical beauty of
Yeah.
sorts. Yeah, but I was not sad that that did not work out.
Mhm.
That was not what was going to happen. Totally fine with that, but that's very interesting. I think like it's really fun to talk to authors and sort of hear how characters almost organically write themselves. I mean, there are people who when they write they immediately are like they know who these characters are and everything is very deftly plotted, and then there's also the style, or just rather the philosophy of certain writers, where a character will show up and you think this character is one person, and then they're just like, no, actually, or yeah, I'm actually that person, but I'm even more of that person than you thought
Mhm.
I was.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So if I can talk about one character who really is the definition of that, because I'm that writer, that is my writing style, is I have a good idea who the characters are and what their conflicts are and their vulnerabilities, but they often show themselves in the process of writing. I learn something about them as we go. A lot of characters I've done this way. Yugen, I think, stands out head and shoulders amongst them. Yugen, so again, he was at first just an antagonist. He was just an asshole. Like that was all he was supposed to be. He was supposed to have some conflict about maybe like potential of a noble and stuff like that. But the more I wrote him, I'm like, there's real vulnerability here. Like all of this seething anger, it's just like it's because no one's given him a chance. It's because he doesn't let no one trusts him, so he doesn't trust anyone in return, and he's been stuck in this horrible situation for so long. And so, yeah, it's kind of in the same way that I felt that heat between Anka and Yugen. It's like, no, Yugen is way more complicated than I thought he was. Anka's conflict evolved definitely over time. I kind of had an idea that obviously she was very like honor bound, very duty bound, but her worries about her legacy, specifically relating to eventually, early in the book, she expresses that she would love to have a child down the road at some point, but not with this man, not under these circumstances. Her conflict became much more existential as I started writing. Yeah, and just definitely the main characters evolved like a lot. I will say I will give one character who did not change an iota throughout, Queen Astasia. She if anything, I was a little uncertain exactly what direction to take her. I knew she was always going to be young. I knew she was always going to be mean. When I finally settled on Regina George, essentially from Mean Girls, I was just like, okay, yeah, she's just like that. Of course, she's a lot smarter than I think maybe some readers will think she is. And you kind of see that later on in the book. But yeah, that's a character that just didn't change. It's like, I know her mark and she is what she is.
I mean, she's very young. Is she like 20 or
She's like 20,
not
maybe
even?
21 at best. Yeah, it's a
Yeah.
situation where I specifically wanted someone who it's like, you're mean because of the situation you've been raised in. You're also too young to have a sense that you are out of your bounds. I thought of a character that's like, who can be the most vicious, cutthroat, self-interested person I can think of? And it's like, oh yeah, in my early 20s, I kind of felt that way a little bit. So yeah, no, I think it's just a case where I was like, I didn't really intend to say anything about like youth or anything like that. I think I wanted to typify this character as someone who did not feel like they belonged on the throne, making her very old. Like you think of evil queens and you think of like older women generally as the prototype or the stereotype. But that didn't feel quite right because I feel like at that point you have enough experience not to get thrown off the throne that easily. Because I kind of knew sort of the direction the story was going, I needed someone who was smart, cunning, but not necessarily wise enough to keep their temper in check.
And the interesting thing is, usually, like if you look at a lot of tropes of fantasy sci-fi, the young queen is like you have Padme, who, is from a society that seems to think finding a 14-year-old child to be a monarch is the best way to go. You have, I mean, I suppose, and she really, unfortunately for her, was put through the ringer, Sansa Stark.
Yeah.
It was a young queen and she grew into wisdom by being treated absolutely horribly. One can say that had she become Queen of the North in the beginning, or had Joffrey not been Joffrey, she could have been just a terrible, vapid non-ruler, but still, it is a really interesting thing to look at of a monarch who was raised to be a certain way and then ended up on the throne very young and was like, okay, we got it. I know what
Mhm.
I'm doing. It's not
Yeah.
nice.
No, it's not. No, I did enjoy her. I enjoy her quite a bit as a character. Yeah.
So, where do you see this world going? So, this is a duology, but the duology is the story really between Eugen and Anca. And actually, one thing I wanted to get back to real quick, because you kind of mentioned, is how Anca does mention that, one day she would like to have a child. I think that it was just a very honest and kind of a very sort of respectful way of just looking at somebody as a whole. Because again, like a lot of times in fantasy, it's like you're either girl boss, but you don't ever want to have a kid, or you're the mother archetype. And it's very realistic. And I'm not to say that a woman has to become a mother at all. I think
Of course.
you should want to be one. But I also think it's kind of rare that we see someone sort of look at things in that way, where it's like, look, this is something I wouldn't not want down the road. This is something I do want down the road, but but this isn't the time, or the circumstances in which it would happen are not what I would want for myself. And I think that that's something we rarely see. On the other side of it, and I don't want to get too much into spoilers about Eugen and his whole situation, but the fact that he's her romantic interest, and, I would imagine the person she would want to have a child with eventually, um, makes it very, very complicated.
Yeah, so I actually really enjoy tropes as a selling point for romantasy and romance. It works for that genre because I really love romance because of all the different stories you can tell. I know people kind of castigate romance as like, oh, it's the same story every time. It's like, no, it's not at all. And it's like, there's room for some real emotional vulnerability when it's not just, actual dangerous situations, be it like suspense or romance or in fantasy, but then also you add emotion into it and like falling in love, breaking hearts, all that stuff. And it's just so great. The one thing that I've noticed in romantasy specifically, there are a few choice characters and choice plot lines that are kind of being recycled a bit viciously sometimes, where it's just like, no, this sells, people like this. And sometimes they're done very well. I'm not saying that the shadow daddy trope is dead or anything like that, but I've read some shadow daddies that I'm like, this didn't need to be here. This person could have been someone much more interesting. I think we're starting to see a move away from that of just like copy pasting shadow daddies into everything. But I knew when I was writing this story, it was like, okay, I don't really want to go into these tropes, but I also really just like writing authentic, organic characters. Even if it's like this is not necessarily what the market wants, or this isn't necessarily what we see in a romance, that's kind of what I really like. And also like it's worth pointing out my perspective. I'm obviously not a woman and in a very woman dominated genre. It's something that I just want to do. I really enjoy romance. I really enjoy writing it. I enjoy reading it. It just really does something for my sense of like these are the stories I want to tell. I'm not here to like pitch anything like masculine romance or any crap like that. That doesn't need to exist. But I'm just, I'm honored that I can write in this space and people can enjoy my stories. And that's really what my focus is on it. But as far as the second part of sort of the prompt, Eugen being an orphan, Eugen having a very complicated history with his family because, the power that keeps him safe and protected is also the thing that damns him to be a pariah. And I'll tell you, it's as the story goes on, it raises a lot of questions about true that, there are a lot of redeeming features in this guy. I will say that a previous version of this book, the version that went out to my beta readers, did not have a happy ending. It ended with Eugen caving to his worser impulses. And I'll tell you so to touch on like a more personal topic, the dedication for this book, it reads for everyone who is angry and doesn't want to be. I'm someone who has struggled with anger problems for a very long time. I finally have them under control, but growing up, I grew up around anger and I learned to be angry. And it's taken a long time to sort of master that and learn to accept it and take the onus of you are in control of your anger. It's not the thing that made you angry. It's not the people in the room. You are the one who is responsible for your rage. And as I was writing Eugen, whose superpower is quite literally invincibility at the cost of anger, I found me pouring my own demons into this character and sort of working through it. And originally, my first idea with Eugen was that, again, it was an unhappy ending because he sort of caves to his worser impulses. And that was a reflection of my own struggles with anger because I've had years and years and years in and out of therapy that it is tension, outburst, regret, tension, outburst, regret. And it just sometimes it took a very long time to get a handle on it. So it was writing Eugen in a place where I was beginning to really master them, my emotions, and being able to recognize my anger and keep it bottled up and slowly ease it away altogether. It turned into sort of like a bit of therapy writing, if I'm being honest, to like create a character who's like, oh no, you can see him master these issues, throughout the story, or at least struggle with them. And some people have reached out to me. It's been really touching to have readers reach out to me, and someone specifically messaged me just to tell me how much this book impacted them and really made them reflect on themselves. And that's, at the end of the day, that's more than I could ever dream of getting out of this book. It means a lot to me.
Yeah, no, it was really good. I'm happy to hear that there's the sequel coming so soon. Does it have a title yet? Or are you allowed to say?
Yes. So I settled on the title. It is going to be Chosen to be Monsters. It is, again, I'm not going to give a blurb. I'm not going to talk about what's going to happen in it because, again, that will give spoilers to Fated. It will be, again, Chosen to be Monsters is the finale of the Fated Hunters duology. However, the story doesn't necessarily end there. So I remember you asked about the world and some of the spinoffs that are coming and all of that. I do have spinoffs in mind. I have some characters who I already know I want to tell stories about. And then also I will be, after I finish this book, I will be returning to my other book, Curse of Flame, and the sequels coming from that. So I don't intend to leave this world for quite some time.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for chatting with us. Once again, this was Jessica with Syosset Public Library's Turn the Page podcast. Check out Fated to be Monsters. I'm looking forward to Chosen to be Monsters. And Javon Tobel, thanks for chatting with us.
Yeah, thank you so much, Jessica. It was a lot of fun.
We are going to close this chapter of Turn the Page.
It's time to close this chapter of Turn the Page. Join us for the next episode.